Hello, this is Mrs. Brown, and today we're going to be looking at factoring out the GCF, the greatest common factor. So let's start with what is a factor. If I have the problem 5 times 4 equals 20, 5 is a factor of 20 and 4 is a factor of 20 because they both go evenly into the number 20. So if I take any other number, like let's say I take 15, what numbers are factors of 15? Well, I can do 1 times 15, so 1 and 15 are factors, and I can do 3 times 5, so 3 and 5 are factors. So 15 has 4 factors, 1, 3, 5, and 15. If I take a number like 24, 24 has a lot of factors because you can do 1 times 24, you can do 2 times 12, 3 goes into it 8 times, and 4 goes into it. So 24 has 8 factors because each of these numbers goes evenly into 24. So when we say factor out the greatest common factor, we're looking for the largest number that will divide evenly into both terms. So it has to divide into this term and it has to divide into this term. Remember, terms are separated by addition and subtraction signs. So I need to find the largest number that divides into 12 and 18. Okay. If you don't notice what it is off the top of your head, and some people tend to grab it like that, and other people it's a little bit more challenging, and that's okay. What I would suggest is to take those numbers and think about what does divide into it. So if I have 12, I can do 1 times 12. Does 2 go into it? Well, it's even, so yes, and that's 2 times 6. I check for 3, 3 goes into it, times 4, and then if I started with 4, it would be repeating. So these are the 6 factors of 12. I'm going to do the same thing for 18. 1 times 18. Well, obviously 1 is in common, but that doesn't really help me when I'm factoring. It is even, so 2 goes into it because 2 times 9. So 2 is a common factor. I don't know if it's the greatest common factor. 3 does go into it 6 times. So 3 is a factor that's in common and 6 is. So far 6 is the biggest. So if I check 4, for instance, 4 doesn't go into 18 because it goes into 16 and 20. And 12 doesn't go into it because 12 times 2 is 24. So these are the factors of 18 that are going to matter. So the largest number that goes into both of those numbers is 6. So what I'm going to do is factor out the 6 by doing this. Basically, I put it on the outside of parentheses. This is the distributive property, so we're using the distributive property to factor. And I say to myself, 12 divided by 6 is 2. And then I put the end. We know that if I do 6 times 2, I get 12, which is what I want. Minus, okay, 18 divided by 6 is 3. So if I were to use the distributive property and do 6 times this and 6 times this, I should get what I started with. And I do, so this would be factoring out the greatest common factor, okay? So what happens if we have a bunch of variables, okay? So let's say I had, for instance, 9x squared plus 6x. What's the greatest common factor? Well, if I look at 9 and 6, 9 is 1 times 9, or 3 times 3. 6 is 1 times 6, or 2 times 3. So the greatest common factor of the numbers is 3. So I'm going to start with that. But there's an x squared here and an x. So between x squared and x, what's the greatest common factor? Well, remember that x squared means x times x. And so x is just x, so the greatest common factor between x squared and x is x. So instead of just pulling out 3, I'm also pulling out an x. Okay? X squared divided by x is x. Okay? And 9 divided by 3 is 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. And x divided by x, remember, anything divided by itself is going to be 1. So that's just what it is. There's no variable. It cancels out. Okay. If I were to check my answer by using the distributive property, 3 times 3 is 9. X times x is x squared. 3 times 2 is 6. And then I have my x because there's no x on the other one. I get back to what I started with, so I know I did this part correctly. Okay. Let's take a look at another example. So as I take a look at this, again, I'm going to start with the numbers. Well, I may notice that 6 goes into 12 evenly, so therefore 6 is the greatest common number for those. Because again, if I look at my factor list for those two, okay, and as the more that you factor, the more you'll memorize these lists because it tends to be the same numbers over and over again. The largest number that's in both factor lists is going to be 6, so that's going to go on the outside. Well, you notice I have X and Y. So the next thing I'm going to do is look at what's the biggest X that I can take out if I can take one out, and what's the biggest Y I can take out if I can take it out. So I have an X squared and an X. So if I think about X squared, that's X times X. And X is just X, so the greatest common factor is X. I probably shouldn't have put that there. So I can take out an X and still be okay. Between Y and Y squared, well, again, Y squared is Y times Y, and then I have Y. It's all by itself, so the greatest common factor between Y squared and Y is Y. And so I can remove that, and then I just need to take this term and divide it by what I'm factoring out, and take this term and divide it by what I'm factoring out. So 12 divided by 6 is 2. X squared divided by X, remember that's X to the first, so 2 minus 1 is 1, so that's just X. Y divided by Y is 1, because they cancel out, because any number divided by itself is going to equal 1. So I leave that, plus 6 divided by 6 is 1, so it's going to be a coefficient of 1. I can write a 1 here, or I can leave the 1 off, because if I put X, that means 1X, or if I put Y, that means 1Y. So I'll put a 1 here. I don't have to have it there, but especially when you're learning, it's probably easier to place it there. X divided by X, remember any number divided by itself is 1, so X divided by X is 1. And then Y squared divided by Y, well, this is Y to the first, so 2 minus 1 is 1, so it's just Y. Okay, so it's 1Y, or again, you can just have 2X plus Y, and that's equivalent. If I multiplied this back out, I should end up with this. So 6 times 2, because I'm going to check my work, is 12. X times X, that's X to the first times X to the first is X squared. Y, there's not a Y to multiply by, so I just put that there, plus 6 times, okay, there's a 1, so it's just 6. X times, there's no X, so it's just X. Y times Y is Y squared. So I end up with what I started with, so I know that I factored this correctly. Okay, let's take a look at one more example for today. Okay, so when let's take okay. So again, I'm going to take a look at this and start with the numbers. I've got 36 and 12. Well, if you know your multiples, you know that 12 goes into 36 3 times. So the largest common factor is going to be 12. You could list the rest of them out, but if you notice, since 12 goes into 36, 12 is going to be the greatest common factor. So that's the number I'm going to pull out. Okay, now I've got X to the fifth and X to the third. Well, if you think about what these mean, oops, that's X times X times X times X times X, and this is X times X times X. Well, they have 3 X's in common, so the greatest common factor between them is X to the third. Since X to the fifth is a larger exponent than X to the third, X to the third is going to be the greatest common factor between those two, just like 12 was the greatest common factor since 12 went into 36. So I'm going to pull out 12 to the third power. Again, thinking about what these mean, it helps me to kind of figure that out. I've got Y to the third, which is Y times Y times Y. And then I have just Y. So the greatest common factor would be y, because it's like y to the first, and since y to the third has a larger exponent than y to the first is the greatest common factor. Okay, now I'm going to divide out, taking that skill, 36 divided by 12. I just divide the coefficients like normal, so 36 divided by 12 is 3. Then I have x to the fifth divided by x to the third. So I do my quotient rule, 5 minus 3, which is 2. Y to the third divided by y, remember that's like y to the first, so 3 minus 1 is 2. There's a plus sign, and now I do the same thing with the other term. 12 divided by 12 is 1, so I don't have to do anything there. X to the third divided by x to the third is 1, because, again, any number divided by itself is 1. Okay, y divided by y, also 1, because it's the same number divided by itself. And so that's actually what it looks like factored. Again, we can check our work by going back and distributing and just seeing if I get the same thing. 12 times 3 is 36. X to the third times x to the second, I do 3 plus 2 is 5. Y to the first times y to the second is y to the 1 plus 2, or 3. Plus, I put my plus sign, 12 times 1, it's like 1 times this whole thing, so 12 times 1, and then x to the third y. And I have what I started with, so therefore I factored this correctly. Okay, I hope this helps, and have a fabulous day.